Good morning, Jean Fitzgerald, Sister George Agnes, known to some.
Knowing to some, a few.
To a few that you taught or that you met along the way.
Along the way.
Well, thank you for coming and to give us a little bit about your history and congregation history as well. Now, you came to us, you were born in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Yes, that's right. The whole family was born there.
So can you give us a little history on that? And then I noticed that you went into Detroit.
Well, let's see, I was born in 1927, and we lived in Green Bay. I was born there, of course, in a short period of time because my dad had a job, and in order to continue, because this was a fragile time in the economy, he was transferred, and he was willing. The family would move. So
How many were you at that time?
There were. I only had one brother.
Okay.
And so I was the youngest. So we moved to Sioux City, Iowa, and lived there for maybe 4, 5, 6 years. Because by the time we got to Detroit, I was in 4th or 5th grade, something like that. Mm-hmm. And each time the move, it was be flexible, and you can make it in the organization that he was in. So that's the pattern in those three places is where we lived.
And so then you ended up in Detroit.
And I ended up in Detroit.
On the east side of Detroit?
The east side of Detroit in St. Matthew's Parish, and within a few blocks of Dominican High School.
And how was school? What kind of sisters you had sisters at St. Matthew's?
The IHMs. And they were very good. I was always impressed. Their style was different than the Dominicans, but they were very good instructors.
When you say their style, or our style was different from the IHMs, what was that?
I think the Dominican sisters seemed more relaxed in the classroom situation. Not that they lost any kind of control or anything, but they were more relaxed. And the IHMs had a more uniform structure, you could tell, at least as my memory, which obviously isn't what it used to be, so I have to qualify that. Anyway, they were very good teachers.
Anything special you remember about grade school?
Nothing in particular. Well, I do remember, no, it was not at the time of the war, but it was around 8th grade, 9th grade, or something in there, of course, that the beginning of World War II for us, Pearl Harbor, came about. So those memories are pretty well deep. You don't forget those kinds of things. So,
and especially being a history person.
Well, and especially because my brother, who was a senior in high school, the second year of the war, and rather than being drafted, he got my parents' permission, signature, to enlist in the Air Corps, and that's what he did. And he went through this whole basic training, ended up being trained as a pilot. And so those years, that was pretty much during my high school years. His last year of service was in a German prison camp.
Oh my!
So those years you don't forget. No matter how old you are, you don't forget it. But he was one of the fortunate ones that was able to come home, and he has a lovely family.
Oh, that's good to hear.
And at least 20 more years of life. He died when he was about 40, thoracic cancer. And I used to think it may have been because he was a heavy smoker, but having read more about the environment in those bombers, he flew B-24 bombers, what they were inhaling has become a real, they are much more conscious of the kind of things that they were inhaling. Anyway, he was one of the fortunate ones until.
How sad. How sad. How wonderful, but how sad and how painful for your parents.
It was
over there.
But it was a moment in my parents' life that really struck me was their devotion and trust in each other. Because the first thing you get is a telegram saying he's missing in action. And you don't hear anything for a couple of months, maybe longer. We waited a couple of months. Then you get a word thanks to the to the World Red Cross and their services. You get his name is on a list of who was in this German camp. Stalag Luft 3 was the name of the prison camp that he was in.
Mm-hmm.
So,
did he talk about it much when he came
to
home?
my dad he would, but he
oh, that's
wouldn't to
good.
my mother, and he didn't
Yeah.
to me either.
Yeah.
It was pretty raw, I'm
Yeah.
sure. But it was the last year of the war, and I think the attitude and the way they treated prisoners was a little different, knowing that they were not on the winning side of this war.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's just my guess.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So it's you and your brother that were...
Just Jim and I.
Uh-huh.
My brother's name was James.
Jim. Very good. So you went to Dominican high school,
I did.
all right. And how was the high school years for you?
It
With
was
all
challenging,
girls.
but I liked it. I mean, I didn't particularly notice it was, the all-girl thing. I didn't particularly. But
What was challenging about it?
The kind of teaching. I had great, Robert Louise, if you remember her. She was my English teacher, and I forget who else was. They were all great. They were extraordinary, gifted women.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at it from the other side, I see how much other things were going on in their lives besides being in the classroom.
Isn't that true?
Yes.
You can see it from both sides
now. Yeah, no, they were great. Clarita Marie was, Clarita Marie taught science. In fact, we were the second class to go 4 years at Dominican High. And Clarita Marie was the homeroom teacher for our group from freshman, sophomore, and junior year. So their lives were in flux too.
Exactly,
because so this was Dominican High, just the first... Must have been around 1941, I think it opened.
In the 40s, I know it opened in the 40s. All right, so you decided when you were in high school about becoming a sister. Had that been...
It hadn't been. I mean, I can't give you any dramatic long time.
You haven't made up anything, huh?
No. But I think my dad used to think that I decided to enter because I did it because of praying for Jim to come home.
Oh.
Jim's experience influenced me, I think, in terms of my values, but it wasn't the motivation or anything, so.
Is your brother still living?
No,
Okay.
my brother died in 1965 at the age of 40.
Oh, 40, that's right.
The first person in the family, the only one that I was ever with when they died. I used to go there. I was still in Ohio, and so I would travel there on the weekends, spend time with him.
That's an interesting story. Yeah. My brother just was from Vietnam, and he, that Agent Orange, it just in combat. Yeah.
That war was so.
Jim, his name is Jim.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Ken Burns' last big program on Vietnam, I thought was extraordinary. I forget how many. He had 10. A series of 10, but the rawness. But the other thing about the Vietnam War is, I trace my history, it paralleled because Truman is the one who agreed when the French left their colony, that wasn't, I don't even know what its name was, which became Vietnam. We agreed to step in. That's how far back our relations were, all the way into the 70s. But it affected people's lives a lot more than we realize, and including the ones who were there. The rawness of it is just unbelievable, and the politics that made it worse, it was just a nightmare.
We're going to get you to talk about history, and the next time we interview you, let's get back to how did you get to the...
Well, I just get curious, and then I began to read
Good for you. That's a value you have. All right, so you made a decision to... into religious life.
And my parents did ask me to wait a year because, of course, I graduated. Jim had just come back from would you call it, rehabilitation?
Yeah.
Because being and so he was, but he was home at the time of my graduation. So for me to all of a sudden enter, I remember my dad asking me if I'd wait a year. So I went to college for a year.
Oh, good. Where'd you go to college?
Yes.
Siena. So you came over to this side, Siena Heights College.
Siena Heights College.
Right.
Indeed.
Right.
Yeah, Siena Heights College.
All right, who was a great influence in you? Now, you mentioned your brother Jim, but relative to looking at religious life.
The nuns had taught me probably. I admired greatly their. I wish I could think that there were two of them were blood sisters and
Morehouse?
No, not
not
that
them.
group. But they opened the door to ideas and to issues that I just had never dealt with before, and that just kind of triggered. I found it extremely challenging. I really did enjoy it. They really were fine teachers.
Good.
No question about it.
So Adrian it was.
Adrian it was.
And how
All
was it?
100 of us.
gosh.
Of course, our crowd was close to 100 when we entered, if you can believe this. And no one has ever confirmed or denied it, but it was pretty close. We entered in 1946. I graduated from Dominican in 45. Okay, so it was after my freshman year at Siena.
Okay.
And so there were about 100 of us that were there.
And then-
Rose Magda frequently, in fact, it was only in October when they read these remembrances.
Yes,
Rose
yes.
Magdalene was the oldest one in our crowd. And the youngest one, I think, was Carol Jean.
McDonald. She's
Yeah.
your crowd. Wow.
Yeah. And so I don't think there's more than about 5 or 6 left in all, but one is on the campus.
All but one. Okay, so then you made profession and you went out and began your ministry.
Yeah, and the first 20 some years of ministry were by the older structure of being appointed. 4 parishes,
Right.
4 parish schools. I taught there, and then I taught Hoban Dominican. I taught at Hoban Dominican for 6 years, and then I worked in the diocese for 4, the remaining 4 years. So that is, I think it's close to about 25 years of being appointed. No, it didn't end until after my last assignment was when Rosemary had the brilliant idea of making me the academic dean of Siena Heights College, and I was there. The beginning of their next 50 years. They had just celebrated their 50th anniversary in '69, and I arrived in '70, and I thought, what a blessing. 70 to 71. No, I was there. Actually, Trish, Rita Schaefer, and I were sent to University of Chicago for a year to study in their Center for Higher Education, because there was a lot of changes going on in education at the time. So we spent a year there, and then began our responsibilities in '71. And that we actually did have a North Central evaluation during that time, which we succeeded in, but we had changed so much.
Isn't it amazing, though, what was presented to us? I want to say offered to us, but it wasn't offered.
It wasn't offered.
This is where you're going. This is what you're going to do. Nothing but the grace of God. What? Got us through that. And good friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, that's right.
And good friends.
No, there was, they were very challenging years because it was in the '70s, which was right after Vatican II, right? We were still trying to figure out, things, and in addition to that, there were the curriculum at Siena, as I recall it, was still to earn a degree. Almost all the courses that you took were required. I mean, you didn't have much flexibility, and more there were opportunities, and you had the beginning of advisory programs in schools. So that transition started around that time. It was difficult, but it wasn't any personal idea. It was just exactly the kind of thing you were competing against in these schools. Plus the fact that it was co-ed. It had become,
Siena,
when they decided, when the council withdrew from being the board for all of our schools. Remember, they were also the board for all of the sponsored institutions.
Oh, really? Okay.
So they pulled, they had boards of lay people and others that, normal kinds of boards. But I think it was at that session they made the decision to change Siena from a women's college to a co-ed college. Have you ever tried doing that?
No, I've never.
However, this is my own guess. I think we probably were somewhat helped in attracting students, not only because of their education, but in those years, those were Vietnam years, and they were the years of really young people rioting against that war, if you recall. If you withdrew from a college and you did not have, could be immediately drafted. In fact, I remember them asking, they were telling all the colleges that we had to give them the names of every male student. And we refused. I think as a group, we didn't have a meeting. Nobody would. And of course, the courts agreed.
So Siena refused to give the names.
Oh yeah, but along with all the others, it was private information. They had no right to ask it. But
Who's
of course,
they? Who are they?
The board, the draft boards.
Got it.
Because then they kept tracking where they were. If they dropped out, they were immediately,
Interesting.
So it was during those times that the college was. We saw it internally as a change in our own ministry, but the environment in which the change happened was had a greater impact than I think we realized.
Your time at Siena, you were not just at Siena, you've been out west.
Yes,
ministries
the
have taken
era
you.
of when you could choose your own.
Correct.
So
Yeah, you
as
start
I'm
choosing.
preparing to leave Siena, I put together my first resume. And I was about looking for people who would be willing to at least give a recommendation for me. You know how you list references. And as I asked this educator, the man, Fred Harris, Dr. Fred Harris, who was the chair of our academic affairs committee, with whom I had worked. And he had just made a change, which I didn't know. He was, I think he might have been the president of the Methodist University in Indiana. I forget the name of it. Anyway, he had accepted a position of administration in the United Methodist System of Higher Education, which I wasn't that aware of it, although Adrian, of course, is part of that system at that time. I don't know how it works today. And so he agreed to, said yes, he'd be glad to be listed. But in the meantime, he went to the president and said, do you think she could ever work for a Methodist system? To make a long story short, I worked for them for 12 years.
Oh, interesting.
12 years. 3 in Nashville, Tennessee at their headquarters, and 3 at a college in West Virginia Wesleyan, 9 years. Which is remarkable, interesting to see education from a different point of view. And yet the philosophy of their schools wasn't that far removed from what ours were.
And I see that you were in San Antonio at St. Mary's University for a sabbatical.
I was, when you make these changes, which I knew I needed to do. So I decided, okay, I think I'll ask for a year of study, a sabbatical. And so I got a year of study. And I chose San Antonio because of their curriculum. It wasn't because Dorothy Folliard was there.
Oh, I didn't
even know.
So what did you study?
Social issues and things like that, and yes, and I did enjoy a course on the Old Testament. I decided I'd treat myself to understanding something a little bit better than I did. So it was a year of study, and that was the year that that I received an invitation from Julie Heyer to come to the hospital. And what I was going to do there, which of course is nothing what I had been doing for years, was to coordinate their volunteer system in a hospital, which was interesting for about 4 years. But after that, I had had some exposure along the line, especially when I was in college, these colleges, because the use of technology was creeping in to the way you handled records and like, and so I welcomed I welcomed the era of Excel, the system that you can do data on, because the predecessor to that was Lotus 123, I think it was called, and it was really for people who knew how to write technical programs. But anyway, I became interested and I was available, and so during the transition when the hospital, by that time the hospital was transitioning into Catholic healthcare system. That was the first system that we started to, which means you are now in a system where the data is being used by a larger group.
More
and
than
so
just
there
the
was
one.
a lot of
So you've had a lot of varied experiences in your lifetime.
I did.
Those that you were totally prepared for and those that were
No,
a surprise.
that's
As you
right.
look back, Jean, on your many ministries, can you think of perhaps one that was just very significant?
You know what, in preparation for this, and I gave some thought to it, it seems to me that the experiences that you had in one area became very helpful in the
Yes.
next. And that's, for example, the last one that I had when I worked for the diocese, because Rita Eileen gave my name to the bishop who needed somebody to be. And what did he want? He wanted a vicar for religious, but not to sit and counsel people. He had, because of these legal things for sex abusers and the like, they were facing the same financial crisis, and so he canceled the diocesan newspaper. And the religious, the sisters, and there were 30 different congregations, and and wanted somebody to kind of give them so they had some information. So the sister that I followed made an attempt to do that, and she was creative indeed. I couldn't do it the same way. Well, actually, I never got her information until about 4 months after I'd been working there. But I was put out a newsletter every 2 months. And so the newsletters, I think, filled. So I had to do a lot of research because this was a time when some of the congregations were celebrating anniversaries. One congregation that was diocesan played a significant role in the diocese. The last sister died from that congregation, so you
tried to help out there.
You tried to write the so that
Yeah.
you write. So I ended up writing these bi-monthly newsletters. Again, it dates back to some other experience that I had that gave
And you
me
were also very flexible. Who taught you that? You said at the very beginning of
Life.
Life taught you.
Yeah.
Now,
and my dad was very flexible in a labor market that was very tricky in the 20s and the 30s, right?
And his values, plus the values of your parents,
Indeed.
are part of who you are to this day. So as you look back at your life and look forward, you made a change to come here to Adrian. You out in California last.
I thought
Then you
at
ca-
87, as I told the bishop, it was time to quit. Before I lost it, and he wouldn't know where I was, and I didn't know where I was. He laughed at that, but anyway. Then
Just
I worked
like
here
I
for
couldn't
3
find
years.
you today.
Then I worked here for 3 years, and I followed Catherine Podvin's good example. She retired when she was 90, and I figured it was time to do the same. So I
Good.
retired when I was 90.
That's right.
That's what you call it.
Exactly. So what brings you passion at this time of your life? And maybe passion in a different way.
Life and the issues that you're facing.
Yeah.
For example, what I'm reading today is I'm reading a book by Carrie Gibson. That doesn't sound Spanish, does it? She wrote she wrote a history called El Norte, which is the forgotten Hispanic history of North America. Because that was, when you study American history, which I did formally, it's all British, English, American, you know, European. We've left out an awful lot, and it's rather dense, but she covers an awful lot.
So you keep
all you have to do is look at the architecture in the Southwest, or the architecture even in Florida today. You see elements of what would be considered Spanish. So even if we don't have it in our minds, we see it all around us. In fact, Nogales, have you heard that?
Yeah.
We were using Nogales, I think, as a recovery place for our sisters with tuberculosis. But it seems to me, as I look at the numbers, it was before Arizona was even a state. We were there about in 1910 or something.
Okay.
And it didn't. So
you have? We have to stop. I know you hate to do that. Do you have some words of wisdom, favorite scripture that you'd like to leave with us?
I have lots of favorites. I have all kinds of tucked away quotes that I give myself.
Right from your heart today, what would you like to say to us in conclusion?
I think the one that I like the most is was discovered after this person, Dag Hammarskjöld, does that ring a bell, was the Secretary General of the United Nations, and they discovered his diary, or his journal, they call it today. It's called Markings, is the title of the book. And he has a passage in there that he wrote to himself that I think is good. Read carefully the book your life is writing, and learn. So that's what I'm doing.
Say that again.
Read carefully the book your life is writing, and learn.
And how do you want to remember? How do you want to be remembered?
That I was Dominican, and I was hopefully faithful.
And on time.
Yeah, it depends on how you define it.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Jean, formerly Sister George Agnes, for your patience with us this morning, and also for you and the gift that you have been in our congregation, and for all those with whom you have been in contact.
Well, I can thank the congregation for the gift they have been to me.
Yeah. Thank you.